ago, my husband, family, and I decided that we were going to move to a mini farm. We moved to this little mini farm and we had cats, dogs, chickens, ducks. We had a number of different kinds of animals on this little mini farm. There was a hen house there, and I decided I wanted to have fresh eggs every morning. So we got the hen house all ready. We put hay on the floor. We hung the feeder, you know, the kind that's got the square, the round tube in the middle and the feeder at the bottom. We hung a light. We did the nest so that they were just real comfortable for them to lay in, lay their eggs. And we called up, found some people who had some hens, and went and bought 12 hens. We brought the 12 hens. They were in big cardboard boxes. We brought the 12 hens, and we just opened the door to this newly renovated hen house and dumped these hens out into the hen house. And nothing really important took place. They started, pecking around, trying to figure out where they were and what they were going to do until it came time for feeding. The first time that I took food up to this hen house, I was blown away. I took the food in, I poured it in the long cylinder at the top, the food came out the bottom, and immediately one big black hen made her way to the feeding trough, and she fed until she was finished. After this one big black hen was finished, there were 3 other hens that made their way to the feeding trough. Now all this time, all the other hens are around the edges of the hen house watching what's going on. Those 3 made their way to the center. They fed. When they were finished, then all the other hens came up and ate. This happened day after day after day. Now, being from the farm, I understand what the pecking order is. I understand that that's just not a nice phrase. That's a real thing on the farm. It's this pecking order. Then I decided, it might be kind of fun to raise some baby chicks. So in order to raise baby chicks, you have to have fertilized eggs. So we called up the same people that we got the 12 hens from and said, we'd like to come buy a rooster. And he said, sure, I've got several roosters. So we went, we bought the rooster, we put him in the cardboard box, we took him up to the hen house and did the exact same thing we did with the hens. We opened the cardboard box, dumped him out in the hen house, and then it was amazing. The hens formed a giant circle around this one rooster who stood in the middle. And for a good 60 seconds, they stared at each other, and nobody moved. After 60 seconds, approximately, this big black hen moseyed up to the center and challenged this rooster. One thing she didn't know, he had spurs and she didn't. She fought him. He defeated her. So she walked back over to the side and he stood there and waited. Next, each of those 3 hens, one by one, made their way up, fought the rooster, he defeated them, and then they went back in line. And he waited. After those 4, nobody else came up. The rooster immediately spread his wings, flew to the rafter of the hen house, and crowed to high heaven. This is my hen house now. I have one, and it's going to be done my way. This is an example of a type of leadership that has been present in our United States since the early 20s. Positive organizational behavior is what I want to talk about today, which is the exact opposite of this type of leadership. And I'm going to go back and talk about Elijah in just a minute. Positive organizational behavior means that goodness and excellence can be analyzed and achieved. Now think about that. Goodness and excellence can be analyzed and achieved. Before we thought that people who were employees in companies, either they were good or they were excellent, but it was not something that could be analyzed and achieved. It was something that was who they were. What science has found out is that is entirely wrong. It can be analyzed and it can be achieved. The psychological focus is away from the mental illness to the building of mental health. My father-in-law, my first father-in-law, was the chaplain at Rice Hospital in Tuscaloosa, Alabama. He had 120 mental patients in a choir, and they traveled all over Alabama. They weren't allowed to go outside the state of Alabama, but they traveled all over Alabama and sang at different churches and functions. And they came together as one giant, mighty unit, and they were awesome. They were quite the story in their time. But the concentration was on mental health. You remember, some of you that are at least as old as I am and older will remember what Rice Hospital was like in its inception. It was the thing of that time, but it was a horrible place to be. It was a horrible entity in our country because the concentration was entirely upon mental illness. It was not upon mental health. You know, organizational behavior has been talked about since, as I said, the early 20s, and it's an established understanding in our working world today. But the trend has gone from the old style of organizational behavior to a new style. And it's relatively infant in its understanding and its concept, but great strides have been made to make it more understandable to you and me rather than the psychologist. And it's called positive organizational behavior. There is two theories of leadership, basically two theories of leadership that started from the beginnings of organizational behavior, and that is theory Y and theory X. Elijah was an example, the rooster was an example of theory X leadership. I'm coming in, I'm doing it my way. If you don't like what I have to offer, you can leave. Just like he said, we have a talk with them, and then we deal with that problem. That's an example of theory X leadership, which says, I don't really care about you. I don't care what you're thinking. I don't care how you feel. You line up or you leave. And that's the way it is. Douglas McGregor wrote The Human Side of Enterprise, which talks about these two different types of leadership. And I'm going to tell you as leaders, if any of you are still participating in the theory X leadership style, not only have you probably gone through a tremendous turnover in your business, but you are headed for even a greater turnover in your business because the world that we live in today, people want to matter. They want to make a difference. They want to understand what's going on and how they contribute to the success of that organization. That's what matters in the world that we live in today. Frederick Taylor came along, who is known as the father of scientific management, and he said, wait a minute, this is not good. How can people contribute? How can they have this enthusiasm that he talked about? How can they build a daily life with this old kind of leadership? Because you all know, you've had jobs, I've had jobs where you go to work, and if you don't understand the concept of the organization, you learn your job and you do it by rote. And when you do your job by rote, you go in, you either punch a clock, you get a paycheck, you put in your hours, and you go home and you come back the next week and you do it all over again. That's the way our world where our world has come from. I have a little excerpt from a book here that describes Theory X leadership so well that I wanted to read it. I brought it and wanted to read it to you this morning. Theory X, this gentleman is speaking, I saw Theory X everywhere. Time clocks, narrow work rules, jobs so subdivided that even an idiot would be bored, grown people treated like children. Have you ever had a job where you were treated like a child? Where your boss responded to you with the kind of answer that made you feel about this big? So unnecessary. And when you went away, you had no capability at that moment to pull yourself back up to do a fine job. Treated like children, never let in on decisions, having no consequential information about the business or even their own work. They don't understand how their cog fits into the big wheel. They don't understand that what they do makes this work, that makes this work, that makes this work, and that's what makes the whole organization work. Expected to deliver for management and not to know the reason why. All in a return for a $5 raise every 6 months, a turkey at Christmas, and a chance, if they didn't die of boredom in the meantime, to become supervisors.